Aloha, y'all. Welcome to my channel, The Socially Awkward Chef. I love to cook and eat lots of different cuisines, but if I had to choose a favorite, it would be Mexican food. So today, let's make chile Colorado. But before I get started, if you're new to this channel like I am, please like, share, and subscribe to help my channel grow. I sincerely would appreciate that. Now that we've got that out of the way, let's get started first by making the base for our chile Colorado. So I've got my chile lineup here. I've got 4 Ancho chiles. I've got 3 Pasilla chiles, 2 Guajillos, and 2 chiles de Arbol. And the next thing I'm going to do with these is take my handy dandy scissors and we're going to stem and seed them. I'm going to put the stems and seeds in this bowl, and then we're going to put the rest of it in this. So let's get started. I'm just going to pull this top off here. It should come off relatively easily. And most of the seeds should fall right out. Move that to the side. Next, and also if you have gloves at home, you can go ahead and put them on. If you don't, no worries. Just make sure that you are careful when you're touching your face, especially your eyes. So make sure that you do wash your hands frequently. Okay, it's 2. Now that we have our chiles all stemmed and seeded, we are ready to go to our next step, which is to warm up the chiles and get their oils moving again since they are dried. We also want to make them a little bit more pliable. So you can take, if you have a cast iron griddle, that's awesome. If not, a frying pan will do. Go ahead and put it on medium heat, and we're just going to go ahead and warm these through. We don't want to get them too dark or anything because we're going to continue to cook them in our sauce. So let's get started. Now that I've got my chiles all warmed through and just shy of toasty, again, we didn't want to get them super brown or anything. We just want to kind of bring back the flavor of each respective chile. So I'm going to regroup and take this griddle off and get our other fixins ready for our chile Colorado. But in the meantime, I'm going to take our handy dandy scissors and cut these up into bite-sized pieces and put them in here. Now that our chiles are all cut up and ready to go, I'm going to take 3 cups of chicken broth. I just used my favorite brand just from the carton. We're going to bring it to a boil. Our chicken broth is boiling, so it's time to turn off the heat, and we're going to add in all of our chiles. It's going to make sure everybody is submerged. And then I'm going to cover this, take it off the heat, and we're going to let it sit covered for 30 minutes. While our chiles and chicken broth are hanging out, let's go ahead and get started by cutting up our beef. So we are going to cut up 4 pounds of beef chuck. And I used to use just the chuck roast and cut it up, but I found that there was a lot of fatty parts to it. So in the end, you end up losing, a bit of what you want to eat. So my personal hack is to use chuck stew meat. So same thing, it's already basically cut up for the most part for you. And we're just going to break it down into bite-sized pieces. So let's get started. What I am looking for is nothing perfect. We want to get somewhere between 3/4 of an inch to 1 inch pieces. It's fine if some are cubes and some look like they're more sliced. The idea is we want to get an even cooking time altogether, since we are going to go ahead and let this braise for a little bit. Well, not a little bit, a couple of hours. So let me give you a couple of examples. So this guy here, it's not so much a chunk as it is like a big thickle slice, versus this guy looks more like a chunk. It's all going to come out in the wash. We are not going to be judging your knife skills. So we're just going to continue on and keep going with these cuts. So again, seeing that's a little bit more flat, that's all good. And bigger ones like this, we'll go ahead and go like so. You get the idea. Now 4 pounds of meat is quite a bit, but what I like to do is make a big old batch and freeze what I'm not going to use, so I have meals for another time, which it really works out. Otherwise, if you don't feel like doing that, still go ahead and make that batch of sauce that we're working on, and then you can just freeze half of it and then just cut up 2 pounds of chuck. And these are really nice, beautifully lean pieces. If yours happen to be on the fattier side, you can go ahead and cut out the fatty bits. Still going to work out all good. I've got the meat all cut up like so. So just to reiterate, it's fine if you have pieces that aren't exactly the same, because the goal is that we want everybody to cook around the same time. And that is what's important. So next up, we are going to work on the rest of our sauce. Next up, we are going to chop up 1 onion and 3 cloves of garlic. I'm going to take off the top and most of this root end of our onion. So at least we have a stable cutting point. So you don't want to cut all the way through. So there, cut this in half. And I'm going to go ahead and remove this outer layer here and this first layer because we don't want any papery, inedible onion pieces. So from here, let me just get these last few pieces off of here. Okay, so I'm going to cut my onion into a small dice, somewhere in between. I always like to call it medium. It's not too big, not too small, but just right. So we're going to cut horizontally across, but not all the way through. I'm going to turn it around to face me, and then I'm going to cut straight down. And you totally don't even have to do this dice. You can chop it up. This is actually just pretty easy. So again, we are not looking for perfection here. And if the knife didn't go through all the way towards this back end, all good. Just cut it like so, and like that. Let's get rid of this end. We're going to repeat the same with this other half here. So we're going to make a few horizontal cuts. Face it towards me, and then cut down. And the slices that I'm making in between are somewhere between, this is probably about a ½ inch, but again, there is no need to be technical about this. I'm just trying to give you an estimate because it's not always the same when you're watching it on your device. I'm going to put this off into a bowl, and then I'm going to chop up some garlic. So for these 3 cloves of garlic, I'm just going to take off this end. Give these a smash. And then we're going to cut it or chop it and chop it and chop it until we get a fine chop. Getting there. That is looking pretty darn good. Just clean off my fingers and my knife. Just to give you an idea, that is about what we're looking for. Put this in a bowl. Okay, I am going to set this aside, wash my hands. It's been a ½ an hour, so let's get the rest of our chili Colorado sauce put together. For this, you're going to need an immersion blender, and if you don't have one, no worries, you can just use a regular blender. But you really do need to have something like that to go ahead and break down the skin of the chiles, even though we went ahead and soaked them in this awesome chicken broth. So let's get started. Untangle this for a second. We're going to place this on the bottom, and we're going to pulse it slowly. And what we're looking for is we want to really puree this so there aren't any big chunks of chili flakes or chili skin, excuse me. All right, let's get going. What I'm doing is I'm lifting, putting it down, and then I'm going to pulse it. Okay, I'm going to repeat, lift, place it down, pulse. Well, there we go, a little splatter. But that's real life for you. It's all good. And I'm going to keep repeating, doing this we're going to repeat doing the same motion until I get this nice and emulsified together. That looks pretty good. So you can see if you have a blender, it would be a lot easier. What you're going to do is just take the contents that we had with the chiles and the chicken broth, dump it into your blender, and process it until it is very, very smooth. I am just going to give this a stir to see where we are at. But that actually looks pretty darn good. So you can see it's pretty smooth. I'm going to try and do this carefully without dropping it. Like that. And it smells nice and warm and peppery. So what we're going to do with this is we're just going to set this aside while we brown our meat. Before I get to browning my meat, I want to go ahead and do a couple of things to it that kind of assist in getting everything nice and brown and toasty. So the first thing is I'm going to add a couple of glugs of vegetable oil. Use what you have on hand. The only one I don't really recommend is olive oil, only because it has a very distinct flavor and you don't want that to compete in your chile colorado. So anything that's neutral is good to go. That was approximately a couple of tablespoons. This is just half of the meat. So this is 2 pounds of meat, 2 tablespoons of oil. To that, I'm going to add a teaspoon of freshly ground black pepper and about a teaspoon and a half of kosher salt. At home and when I'm out cooking for clients, I don't really measure, but I know when you're looking for recipes to cook, you kind of need them. But I always encourage using your instincts and tasting things as they go. Of course, I'm not talking about tasting raw meat. But anyway, let's get started with this. So we have our oil in. We're going to do about the teaspoon of black pepper and teaspoon and a half of kosher salt. And I'm going to use my handy dandy rice paddle to go ahead and mix this up. Now, the reason why I am adding the oil in is because we are going to brown it off. And that's a perfect segue to let you know that while you are doing this, go ahead and get your cooking vessel heating up on medium heat, because we're going to be browning all of this meat in batches. And we're going to do it in batches because if you overcrowd your pot or pan, it's just going to steam your meat, and that's not good. So what I'm going to do from here is do the exact same thing with the remaining 2 pounds of beef. We are going to get to browning our meat. So I've had my cast iron pot heating up on medium heat, and it's getting really hot, you are ready to start browning your meat off in batches. Even though we did toss the pieces of beef in some oil, we're still going to add just a little bit just to coat the bottom. And I'm just going to give my pot a little turn just to make sure everything is coated. And then I'm going to add my meat in batches because we don't, again, overcrowding your pan is going to not facilitate the browning. So you want to have spaces in between. It's been about a minute, so I'm just going to give this a check. So you can see that it's starting to get nice and caramelized. So I'm going to turn these around. And by the way, if a piece of meat does not want to go, let it hang out because it's saying it's not ready yet. It's been another minute, so I am going to give these a check. That is looking good, and I'm going to go ahead and remove this first batch with a slotted spoon. Kind of, if there's any drippings, we'll leave it behind. However, the batch of stew meat that I've got is nice and lean, so yay for that. Just gonna make sure we got everybody out. I'm gonna let my pot heat up for just another few moments, and then I'm gonna add in our second batch and repeat until we are done browning all of the meat. And remember, we are just trying to brown it to get some caramelization. We are not trying to cook it off. Also, if your pot is getting a little dry and it needs a little bit of oil, you can always put in a little bit of a drizzle of oil in your pan or your pot as needed. My second batch is about done, so I am going to remove them and continue on with the browning process until everybody is done. So I'm looking at about 6 more batches. So for every 2 pounds of meat, you're going to do it approximately 4 batches. I've just pulled my last batch of meat to be browned, And it actually wasn't so bad. That ended up being 7 batches of meat. So I just added more of my oil, and now I am going to add my onions in and pick up all those beautiful brown bits of flavor that our beef left behind. So this was our 1 large onion that we chopped up. I'm just going to let that hang out for a minute and give this a stir. And what we're going to do is cook our onions down until they are almost translucent and starting to get a little bit of a brown color on the edges. You do want to go ahead and give your onions a zhuzh every now and again, just so everybody gets contact with the bottom of the pot. And one of the cool things is that all those brown bits that were left behind as we were browning off all the beef are now going to come up because the onions are going to release their moisture and release all of that goodness. So we get to take advantage of all that flavor. And then in a couple of minutes, I'm going to add in our garlic. That is looking good. So I'm going to add in my garlic. Give that a stir. I'm going to let that cook for about a minute, and then I'm going to add in the rest of our spices. Our garlic and onions are looking good, so I am going to add in our spices next. We have 2 bay leaves, a tablespoon of cumin, about a teaspoon and a half of Mexican oregano, teaspoon of salt. I'm going to give that a little zhuzh, and we're going to warm up those spices. And then the fun begins, because now we get to put everything together. I can smell the cumin and the Mexican oregano getting all happy in there. So I'm going to add in all of the meat plus all the juices straight in. And then I'm going to add the Colorado sauce that we made. All of that is going in. Now, we were talking earlier about if you didn't want to make up this entire batch of 4 pounds of meat. I do recommend it because it is excellent to freeze. But if not, go ahead and take half of this Colorado sauce and freeze it. Otherwise, continue on with what we're doing now. Okay, I am going to give this a gentle stir. And then I'm going to add about 3 cups of beef stock. You want enough stock to make sure that your beef is covered. Give this a gentle mix. It needs just a little bit more beef stock. All right, that looks pretty good. So from here, what we're going to do is we're going to let this come up to a boil. And once it comes up to a boil, we're going to reduce it to simmer and let it hang out for at least an hour and a half. And during that hour and a half, come and check on it every now and again because we want to give it a nice stir. But this is a low and slow process, so everybody gets to get happy together and the beef gets to tenderize. So I'll see you in a little bit. We're at the 1 hour mark with our Chile Colorado, and I just wanted to show y'all what we have going on. So the first thing is that I did show our little pot of Chile Colorado some love about every 20 minutes to give it a nice stir to make sure that nothing is sticking on the bottom. And you can see it's been reducing really, really nicely. So the next thing I want to do is kind of skim off some of the fat that has been rendering off of our beef. So I've just got a spoon, and I'm just going to go right across the surface here. Leave that bay leaf in there. And I'm just going to collect the oil. I don't know if you can kind of see that. And I'm going to take my time and do this until I can get most of that fat collected, and then I'm going to throw it out. Now that we've skimmed most of the fat from the top of our dish, next thing I want to do is take a piece of meat and kind of see if I can cut it in half with a spoon against the side of the pot. And since it's not really cutting very easily, that tells me that we're going to need some more time. So I will continue to simmer this for about another 30 minutes and check in on it then. All right, it has been an additional half an hour, so I'm going to just check in on it again and see how our meat is. And that is about what I'm looking for. I can easily cut it in half with a spoon against the side of my pot. And one thing I did forget to mention earlier about the 1 hour mark is when you do want to give it a taste and adjust your seasonings if necessary. If not, you can go ahead and continue on cooking. And as you can also see, since we did let this simmer for another half an hour, that there's a little bit more of oil that has rendered from that. So I'm going to just get rid of that and scoop it out and discard it. Other than that, our Chile Colorado is good to go. So I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope that you make it. And if you did like this video, please again, go ahead and give it a like, a share, and subscribe. And I hope to see you again. Until then, aloha.